Have you ever wondered who makes the most money in a startup? Is it the investors like the venture capitalists, the VCs, or is it the startup founders, those that created the company and got it off the ground? If you've ever been curious to know the answer to that question, you are in the right place because we are going to answer that and so much more coming right up. Right, so we are going to answer that question. Who stands the most to gain? The founders and the CEO in particular, or is it the VCs? Now, this can always be different depending on every single company, but you know what I'm going to do? I am going to use an example so you can kind of see how this would work, and that will teach you how to do the math all on your own. I love following these things because every company has a different journey, and so many of them are fun to celebrate and see. And I can tell you personally, having gone through these events, they are a fun, electric kind of thing. All right, so if we've never met before, my name is Wes Spencer. I'm a technologist, I'm a cybersecurity nerd, and I am a startup guy. So welcome to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me today. We've been covering in a video series some things like how to get startup funding, how we get that off the ground, how we focus in the early days of our company. We focus on the product, or do we focus on the customers first? And of course, that answer really depends on who your market is and how you're diving in. So I'm going to add this video to that playlist. Dive into those others if you want to see more on that. We've also been covering some really cool stuff like innovative cryptocurrencies and why blockchain is such an innovative technology today. But today we are going to answer that question, who stands the most to gain? Here's how I thought we ought to do this whole thing. I thought, you know what? Why don't we actually look at Zoom as a company? So Zoom IPO'd in 2018. It was a raging success. I'm actually going to show this to you right now. Take a look. I've got Zoom open. And you can see here, when they first IPO'd way back in the early days of 2019, they closed at $62 a share. Now, I think they opened much earlier than that. Where their open was somewhere around, if I remember right, like $36 a share. Now, why is that important? Well, we could go back, of course, and look at where they're at today. Look at this, way up at like 246, closing 273 is what they were at, and they're trading right now at the time of this video somewhere around 284. What a rocket ship of a company. And of course, we know the pandemic is one of the things that led to all of that. But I think more than that, one of the questions I wanted to answer is, I'm glad that Zoom did really well. I mean, good for them. And if you own stock in them, good for you, right? Especially for the founders. But what we're going to cover today is the early days of Zoom, right at the IPO. I want to use their information and show how this works for the VCs that have been involved and also for the founders. Now, for you naysayers watching this video, I know that not every company IPOs. And I also know that some companies that IPO never see the success that Zoom had. I'm well aware of that. However, this is a great example of what could be, right? We might as well set our vision and our sight at what could be the opportunity for us, and we'll use this as the standard. So let's go back here. One of the things, I'm not sure if you know this, but I'm actually going to bring this up for you. If you search for Zoom's S1, so this is their filing documents with SEC. This is a public document. This is called their Form S1. This is produced as part of the actual IPO. And so when you open this up, there's a lot of information here that's available for investors to see. And what I'm going to do, I want to scroll down and I want to show you some information. Let's go past all the soft stuff here. Here you go. You can see I already have this open. When you go to the principal and selling stockholders section of an S1, you are going to be able to find what's called the cap table. Now, the cap table is where you see the initial disclosures of who owns what percentages and how many shares in the organization when the IPO formation occurs. And so we can use this magical formula with the addition of what they publicly opened and closed at on the first day of the IPO to understand and answer the question of who stands the most to gain and why. Now, before we dive into that, keep in mind it's a little more complex than just reading the cap table. I mean, the cap table tells you everything, but there are things that happen inside of the cap table that we don't always have an inside look into, but I can give you some generalities to look at to understand a little bit more of how this whole thing would work. So let's dive right in, okay? Here we go. looking at the cap table, there's some things that should stand out for you, right? Notice that the first thing that we see is there's a couple of venture capital firms that own a fair amount. They're listed in the 5% stockholders and greater. And so you can see Emergence Capital, Sequoia, Digital Mobile, and then that last one, I'm not even going to try to pronounce their name. And you can also see, you know, they've done us a solid here. Look at this. They've actually shown us what their percentage ownerships are. So we can see that Emergence is the leading VC with the most amount. Chances are they were the last in. They have the most amount of ownership, but Sequoia is not really far behind. They're really close as well. And then if we scroll down a little bit more, then you start getting into the names. And you probably saw this when I first opened the S1, that Eric Yuan is the CEO. He is the founder and CEO. And so you can see he stands the most to gain overall at 22%. Wow. So I could end this video right here and just say, you know, hey, in this case, the founder and CEO had the most. But I actually want to dive into the numbers, like I said, and I want to kind of explain what all this means and what it means for us. So we do know that Emergence is the largest shareholder. What are some other things that we know? Well, we also know that if you look at the data here, I think I had mentioned before, Zoom started their IPO that day at like $36 a share, somewhere right around that, but they closed at $63 a share. What does that mean? That means the market valued Zoom more than what they thought that they were going to open up at. And there's a lot of strategies in terms of the IPO of what you open at, and you need to be careful with it. It's way beyond the scope of this video. If you're interested in those things, leave me a comment down below and I can answer those questions. But just know they grew like 70% or more, somewhere roughly around there from the day open into the day close of the first IPO. I mean, that's amazing. And you know, a few dollars at 36 to 63, that may not sound like a big deal to you, but that is billions of dollars of difference for the shareholders. I mean, that is colossally important. So incredibly important. So let's go back to the cap table again and let's look a little bit more at all of this. So we now know what they closed at, and I'm going to use those closing numbers at $63 a share at the end of the day of the IPO. And also, again, the nerds that are listening, I know you're going to think, yeah, but Wes, you're looking at early days. I mean, Zoom is worth like 5 times more than what they were worth back then. They're $73. Now they're, like you said, $273. Yeah. I know. I'm just looking at the very beginning because I'm answering the question of how do the paydays work and what happens and who stands the most to gain. That's what we're looking at in this video. So let's kind of distill all of this. If you take the ending value of the shares at the close of the day of their IPO, $63 a share, and you look at the number of shares in that cap table, if you take Emergence, look at what they're worth. They're worth just shy of $2 billion, like boom, overnight. That's amazing. That is awesome. Good for Emergence. Sequoia not far behind, 1.8 billion. So right there, almost $4 billion of value created from the IPO. Now, you could argue the value is there before, but the IPO proves it because of the market demand publicly. Now, what about Mr. Eric Yuan? Eric is doing great. If you run the numbers at 53.5 million shares, Eric is hovering somewhere around 3.3 billion with a B, billion dollars. I mean, that's not just moon Lambo rich. That's not just private island rich. That joins the exclusive of exclusive clubs, right? He can do anything he wants with the rest of his time. And he's still at Zoom, which is pretty awesome. That's incredible. Not many people have the opportunity to wake up one day and all of a sudden you're a billionaire. That's what a raging, successful, and effective IPO can do for you. Now, I know this is rare. An IPO like that does not often happen, but when it happens, it is got to be one of the most amazing things. Okay, so let's go back to this. Let's go back to the cap table. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw some nerd math at you because I want you to kind of see how this whole thing works. So if you look at how all of this happens, first of all, the VCs, yes, if we look at Emergence, they got just shy of $2 billion, unbelievable. But let's look at what happens with that money, right? So first of all, remember the VC has to split those earnouts. There's a lot of things that happen with all of that. One of the things that happens there with the actual income that comes in from all of that is they're going to have to split that out. There's a lot of people that are involved in a VC. There are people like limited partners, which we know about. We're going to cover that in a minute. But then there's, everyone else that's involved, the analysts, the associates, the principals that are all involved. And so when that transaction happens at the IPO, a lot of that is going to get split out among all of the people that are involved inside of the VC. So keep in mind, if we take a rough math, usually limited partners themselves, they're going to keep somewhere between 75 and 80% of the actual IPO. So let me say this again. The limited partners, those that vest inside of the VC firm itself, those are think of them as the investors of the VC, the ones that get it off the ground and provide that funding. They keep 75 to 80% of that $2 billion in this case. So they're doing really well for themselves, right? Now, before you start complaining and saying, well, what about everybody else involved? Keep in mind, that's 80% of $2 billion. That's a lot of money, but there is still a lot of money left over on the table. You would make any person on the face of this earth happy if they could have 20% of $2 billion. Who would say no to that? Do you know anybody that would say no to that? I don't either. And keep in mind, the VC funders, those limited partners, they're the ones that take the enormous risk in the VC by providing that money. See, let me take a big step back here. One thing you've got to keep in mind is this. When a VC invests in the company, there is no guarantee that it's going to work. Statistically, most companies don't work. And so they are putting enormous risk in the funds that they invest into that company. And that's why they get an 80% take home when an IPO event occurs, or an acquisition, whatever happens to be a terminal event that causes a change in ownership. Okay, so let's go back to all of this and talk again about what happens to the rest. So if you take Emergence, they're taking about $1.6 billion, the limited partners, and the rest of that $400 million is going to get split up to the rest of the VC firm, the internal folks inside of the VC firm. So if you were to do the numbers here with Emergence, and I pulled up Emergence, they have 6 partners that are involved in it. And so if you were to take that $400 million, here's what happens with the leftovers, that $400 million in the leftovers. They would take about 80%, the partners take about 80% of those leftover $400 million. So the partners themselves, those are the ones that run the VC day in and day out. They're going to take that 80%. And you could do, it's different for every VC, but let's just keep it super easy. Let's say that Emergence takes those 6 partners and they just split it evenly. So they've got $400 million to themselves, 80% goes to them directly, and then they split that 6 ways. That gets them at the IPO event about $66 million. Now I know what you're thinking. That's not like 2 billion, right? That's not like what Eric got at 3.7 billion. I'm going to get to that in a minute. But they're doing really well. $66 million. Now, some VCs, it doesn't work that way. The managing partner that's the most involved in the transaction might get more, or perhaps in some cases all. But this is just a rule of thumb. So 66 million goes to each of them. And the rest of that 20% of the 400 million, the leftovers of the leftovers, what happens to that? That gets split up inside the rest of the VC firm itself. And there could be a lot of different ways that that works. Okay, let's get back to Eric. So Eric is the one that stood the most to gain here, right? He stood the most to gain in the sense that he just made $3 billion, $3.37 billion if I remember right. So that's a lot of money. Good for Eric. That might seem to you, well, wait a second, I would definitely want to be a CEO and founder, right? I mean, he's the one that made the most money. Wes, you said at the beginning of this video, who makes the most? And you're telling me Eric made the most. In this case, in a single transaction, absolutely he did. No question. Eric made a ton of money. Good for him. But also 2 things you need to think about. 1, Eric took the most risk, right? I mean, Eric was the one that worked tirelessly. When Zoom was founded in, I think, 2011, call it something like that, he went from 2011 to 2018 and 19 before the IPO, working his tail off, 80, 90 hours a week in all likelihood, building a company, stressing over it. And I can surely tell you, having been in the same shoes as he of building a technology company, seeing the potential places where it could just all fall apart, those are the things that you lose sleep at night. But Eric made it through. Eric took extreme risk, went through uncalculable risks. I mean, things that most founders never get to where Eric got. And he got there through hard work, through, let's be honest, a little bit of luck, great market timing, a solid product, and that's what got him to the IPO. And so this is why Eric makes the most money. So here's how I would answer the question that we were coming up to at the very beginning. Who stands to make the most money? Well, it depends on how you look at it. If you look at it in a single transaction, in a single instance and point in time, sure, Eric makes the most money. That IPO event made him a 3x billionaire. Emergence only got 2 billion, oh so sad. And then that got split out 80%. And then the rest of that 20%, 80%, they got split out, right? So 66 million for each of the partners themselves, and the limited partners far more. But we see the answer here that at that point in time, for sure, the ones that got the most money would be Eric. But there's one thing you also need to keep in that calculus. And here's what that is. It's this. VCs, good ones, this is not the only IPO event they have. This is not the only investment that they're going through. See, VCs get lots of at-bats. They're constantly finding companies, and the good ones have a knack for finding successful ones. They know the metrics that they're looking for. I covered this in my funding video a little bit, but VCs are extremely, at least typically, very, very, very narrow-minded in who they're looking for. They're looking for a specific class and categorization and market and industry trends and financial analysis that shows this should be a winner. And so VCs are doing this over and over and over. They might have 2 or 3 or 4 different notable events in a company that they're investing in a single year. And so for them, maybe it's not 2 billion total that they make. They might make, if they're super lucky in an incredible good year, 5 billion that they might make in a single year. And then again, I know how all that gets split out, right? But then think about this. They're doing this year after year after year. Eric did this once. And maybe Eric will do this one more time in his career, but he got, really, let's be honest, one shot at it for a decade. And it worked out for him. Good for him. But that's what I want you to think about is, for most of us, you have the most to gain, statistically speaking, by being a VC. But if things go well for you and you have a great IPO, even though it takes 10 years and you might come out with billions of dollars at the best case scenario, it's still typically not as much as VCs are going to make in their whole, because they're doing this year after year after year, and they're always taking in new organizations. So that's how I wanted to answer the question is, it depends on who you are and what you're built for and what you're thinking about, like what your rubric or framework is. If you're looking at a single point in time, of course, the founder. If you're looking at over and over and over, the VC. I mean, this is why the VC does it. But also VCs suffer extreme risk as well. Just like I told you, Eric spending countless hours and nights and worries and getting through all this and building a company from scratch, VCs are doing the same thing. And in aggregate, that's why they make more money, because they do this over and over and over, and they suffer and take on an equal amount of risk as well. So I hope that was helpful for you. I hope that gives you some answers here. I'd love to know your comments down below. Was this a good video? Is this something you care about? I would love to continue to produce more videos around startups, but I need more traction. So give me a like, give me a shout out, share this to others, and certainly by all means, would you do me a huge favor right down there? Would you click on the subscribe button and the like button? Let's grow this subscriber count. Let's grow this video series, because we are all in this together. Thank you guys so much.